In 1849, amidst the shifting sands and ancient ruins of Mesopotamia, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard made a discovery that would shake the foundations of human history. Beneath the crumbled remains of Nineveh, the once mighty capital of the Assyrian Empire, he uncovered the legendary library of Ashurbanipal. Inside this long-buried treasure trove lay thousands of clay tablets inscribed with mysterious wedge-shaped symbols. These were the voices of an ancient world, frozen in time by cuneiform script. Among them was a tale older than the Bible, older than Homer's epics, older than almost any other written story mankind has ever recorded. The Epic of Gilgamesh. This is not just another myth or forgotten legend. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a window into the very soul of early civilization. It speaks of kings and gods, of friendship and grief, of heroic triumphs and crushing losses. But at its core, it explores a fear that still haunts us all. The fear of death and the desperate, timeless search for meaning in a world where nothing lasts forever. Tonight we journey deep into this ancient narrative, following the footsteps of Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk. He was 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, gifted with strength beyond imagining, but cursed with the same fate we all share, a limited time on earth. His tale begins with tyranny, takes shape through a powerful friendship, and transforms into a quest across deserts and oceans, across the realms of gods and men, all in pursuit of something no human has ever truly attained: immortality. As you listen to this story unfold, allow yourself to drift into the past, to a time when gods walked among men, when cities rose like mountains in the desert, and when the great questions of life and death were first written into stone. Let the rhythmic echoes of an ancient voice guide you towards sleep, reflection, or inspiration. If you find meaning in these stories, if you believe that ancient wisdom still has something to say to us today, consider supporting our journey through time. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and do not forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chance to explore the forgotten legends that shaped our world. Your support helps us bring history back to life, one epic at a time. Now close your eyes if you wish, and join us as we begin the journey of Gilgamesh the king, who could conquer all except his own mortality. Beneath the golden sun of ancient Mesopotamia, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates breathed life into the land, there rose a city of unparalleled majesty, Uruk. Towering walls stretched into the horizon, built with precision and strength that echoed the ambition of a people who dared to tame the wild earth. Within those walls thrived a society of architects, merchants, priests, and scribes, whose innovations would help shape the very foundations of civilization. This was not merely a city. It was a marvel of human ingenuity, one of the earliest true urban centers in recorded history. At its height, Uruk teemed with life. Its bustling marketplaces echoed, with the calls of traders exchanging textiles, grain, metal, and pottery, along complex trade routes that stretched across the ancient Near East. Its ziggurats rose like stairways to the heavens, bearing witness to both spiritual devotion and architectural genius. And at the center of it all stood Gilgamesh, the king, whose story would outlast stone and storm, whose name would be etched into clay tablets and whispered across the ages. 2/3 God and 1/3 man, he was a ruler unlike any other, mighty, wise, and unrelenting. His strength was the stuff of legend, said to surpass that of any mortal, and his intellect burned with divine brilliance. Yet the same divinity that elevated him also set him apart, isolating him in ways no human court or council could mend. He was a man born for greatness, but plagued by the burdens of power, mortality, and the shadow of eternity. In the beginning, Gilgamesh's reign was marked not by compassion, but by domination. His pride, unchecked, weighed heavily on the people of Uruk. He pushed his citizens to the edge, demanding endless labor to build monuments to his glory, forcing ancient traditions to bend under his will. The walls of Uruk may have stood strong, but inside them, unrest simmered. The people cried out not to overthrow their king, but to humble him, to remind him that even the mighty are bound by the same fragile thread of humanity. Their prayers did not go unheard. From the wilds of the steppe, where the forests whispered ancient secrets and the animals lived untouched by the designs of man, came an answer, Enkidu. Born of clay, shaped by the gods, Enkidu was Gilgamesh's mirror in the wilderness. A man untouched by civilization, powerful and primal. He ran with gazelles, drank at the rivers with beasts, and knew no city nor king. But fate was already weaving their threads together. Enkidu would be tamed by human contact, drawn into the world of Uruk through beauty, wisdom, and ritual. And when he finally faced Gilgamesh, it was not in reverence, but in challenge. Their clash was titanic. Two forces of nature colliding in the heart of the city. Stone cracked beneath their feet, dust filled the air, and for hours the fate of Uruk hung in the balance. But neither emerged victorious. Instead, something far more powerful took root: respect, then friendship. This unlikely bond would transform Gilgamesh. No longer was he the untouchable god-king. Enkidu became his equal, his brother in arms, his guide back toward compassion and purpose. Together, they would venture far beyond the borders of Uruk, seeking glory in the face of divine wrath. Their journey would lead them to the fabled cedar forest, guarded by the monstrous Humbaba, an ancient creature of terror set there by the gods to protect the sacred trees. Though warned not to provoke the divine order, Gilgamesh and Enkidu pressed on, driven by a desire to carve their names into eternity. With sword and courage, they vanquished Humbaba. But divine laws are not broken without consequence. Their triumph, bold as it was, invited the fury of the gods. Inanna, goddess of love, war, and power, offered herself to Gilgamesh. When he rejected her, her scorn unleashed the bull of heaven upon the city, a beast so fearsome it cracked the earth with every step. Yet again, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood together, and once more they triumphed. But this time, the cost was too high. The gods had seen enough. A mortal had dared to match their strength, to scorn their dominion. And so, in quiet retribution, they struck down Enkidu, not in battle, but in illness. Slowly, painfully, Enkidu withered. Gilgamesh, who had once feared nothing, now found himself helpless, facing a foe he could not fight, death itself. When Enkidu died, the king's world shattered. Grief consumed him, twisting his strength into desperation. He wandered the earth, shedding his royal robes, abandoning his throne, chasing the whispers of immortality. No longer content to rule Uruk, he sought to defeat the fate that claimed his friend. He journeyed to the ends of the world, across burning deserts and through the tunnel of the sun, to seek out Utnapishtim, the one man who had survived the great flood and been granted eternal life by the gods. What Gilgamesh found was not a promise of immortality, but a lesson as old as time, that death is the destiny of all men, but legacy, what we build, what we love, what we leave behind, endures. Immortality, he realized, is not to be found in eternal breath, but in eternal impact. And so he returned to Uruk, no longer the tyrant, but a true king. He gazed upon the mighty walls his people had built, upon the city he had once taken for granted. This, he said, is my legacy. Not divine blood, not eternal life, but the strength of a city, the memory of a friend, and the wisdom born of loss. This is the story of Gilgamesh, the first great hero of human literature, and a reminder that even gods must learn to be human. Long before he became a figure of legend, Gilgamesh was a living, breathing man. He walked the bustling streets of Uruk, spoke with advisors, issued decrees, and led his people through both triumph and hardship. Historical records trace his existence to around 2700 BCE, placing him firmly among the earliest known kings of Sumer. His name appears in ancient king lists, etched into tablets with the same cuneiform that would later immortalize his deeds in myth. But like all great figures of antiquity, the memory of Gilgamesh did not remain confined to dusty records and stone inscriptions. Over centuries, the stories told around hearth fires and temple courtyards began to stretch and shimmer, growing larger with each telling, until the man who had once ruled Uruk became something more than mortal. He became a legend. At first, the transformations were subtle. A battle won became a battle against overwhelming odds. A journey taken became a pilgrimage across the known world. The king's strength became a strength beyond any man's. These early stories were not meant to deceive, they were meant to inspire. In a world where floods could wipe out cities and empires rose and fell with alarming regularity, people sought symbols of endurance, of courage, of someone who could stand firm against the chaos of the unknown. Gilgamesh became that symbol. He embodied power, wisdom, and ambition, but also pride, restlessness, and the insatiable thirst for something greater. The tale of his reign evolved alongside the civilizations that remembered him. In temples, scribes began to record the growing body of oral tradition, carefully pressing wedge-shaped impressions into clay to preserve the echoes of ancient storytelling. By the time these stories reached their literary apex in the first millennium BCE, Gilgamesh had become a figure suspended between the divine and the human, a king born of the gods, ruling a city forged by the hands of both men and deities. But even as the legends magnified his deeds, they never stripped away his humanity. That is what makes the Epic of Gilgamesh so hauntingly enduring. He is not a flawless hero. He begins his story as a tyrant, oppressive, arrogant, unmatched in strength and pride. The people of Uruk, weary of his cruelty, cry out to the gods, and from this divine plea emerges Enkidu, the wild man, created not just to balance Gilgamesh, but to challenge him. And when the two meet, the clash is titanic. They battle not merely with fists, but with spirit, with identity, with destiny. And from that struggle they become brothers. Through Enkidu, Gilgamesh learns companionship, and through companionship, he begins to change. Their adventures defeating the monstrous Humbaba, slaying the bull of heaven, are not just tales of heroic conquest, but milestones in a deeper transformation. Yet the bond that lifts him up is also the one that shatters him. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is forced to confront a truth that no king, no warrior, no god, born man can escape death. It is here that the myth breathes closest to the real man. A ruler might seek power, fame, or immortality, but what they truly fear, what we all fear, is being forgotten. The Gilgamesh who once ruled Uruk is lost to time, but the Gilgamesh of the story endures, not because he conquered lands or defied the gods, but because he searched desperately for a way to escape death and failed. His failure is what makes him timeless. His journey is not about finding a fountain of youth or an eternal kingdom. It is about coming to terms with mortality and discovering what truly matters when life is fleeting. As we explore this ancient story, it is important to remember that every myth begins with a whisper of truth. Somewhere beneath the layers of metaphor and divine intervention lies the memory of a king, perhaps wise, perhaps cruel, perhaps both, whose life sparked a legend so powerful it survived the collapse of empires, the erosion of cities, and the silence of centuries. Today, thanks to a forgotten library, buried under sand and stone, and to the curiosity of explorers and scholars who dared to unearth it, that legend speaks again. And so, as the story of Gilgamesh unfolds before you tonight, let it be more than a tale of gods and monsters. Let it be a reflection of something deeply human, of grief and growth, of power and vulnerability, of the journey we all take through the unknown. The man behind the myth still walks with us, not in body, but in story. And as long as his tale is told, he never truly dies. If you are enjoying this journey into one of the oldest and most profound stories ever written, we invite you to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. Each view, each click helps us bring more ancient voices back into the present, voices like Gilgamesh's, who still have something to teach us, even across 5,000 years of time. In the shadowed dawn of civilization, where myths were born from the whispers of kings and cities carved their destinies in clay, Gilgamesh ruled the walled city of Uruk. He was a king unlike any other two-thirds divine, and one-third human, a being sculpted by the gods themselves. His might was unquestioned, his intellect vast, and his beauty mesmerizing. The people of Uruk should have rejoiced under his reign, but they did not. Power, in its rawest form, can corrupt even the most noble intentions. And Gilgamesh, in the earliest days of his rule, allowed his strength to eclipse his compassion. He became a ruler feared more than loved, his appetites unchecked, his will law. He overworked his people, claimed brides on their wedding nights, and treated his subjects not as citizens, but as tools in the service of his greatness. The same hands that built Uruk's towering walls trembled beneath his command. The citizens cried out not to their king, for he would not listen, but to the heavens, begging the gods to intervene, and the gods, moved by human suffering, listened. In response, they conceived a plan not of war, but of balance. From clay and the breath of life, they shaped a new being, Enkidu. He was wild and untamed, a man of the earth who ran with gazelles and drank from rivers. He knew nothing of cities, kings, or injustice, but in his innocence he held a purity that Gilgamesh had long forgotten. The gods did not send Enkidu to destroy Gilgamesh. They sent him to reflect what he had lost, to awaken something dormant within him. The transformation of Enkidu from beast to man did not happen by divine force alone. It began with a woman Shamhat, a temple priestess, who approached him not with weapons, but with kindness, wisdom, and warmth. Through her, Enkidu learned language, love, and the rhythm of human life. With each lesson, he grew closer to the world of men and farther from the wilderness he had once called home. His strength remained, but now it was tempered with thought. His wildness turned to purpose. News of Gilgamesh's continued tyranny reached Enkidu, and for the first time, the untamed man knew anger not for survival, but for justice. He entered Uruk with resolve burning in his heart, determined to confront the king who ruled through fear. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu met, it was not with pleasantries or diplomacy, but in a clash that shook the city to its core. They fought not just with fists, but with ideologies. The unstoppable force of unchecked power against the immovable presence of raw moral strength. And yet, as their battle raged, something unexpected happened. Neither could defeat the other. Their strengths were equal, their resolve matched, and when the dust settled, they looked at each other not as enemies but as mirrors. In Enkidu, Gilgamesh saw the freedom and humility he lacked. In Gilgamesh, Enkidu saw a purpose beyond the wilderness he had outgrown. What began as a confrontation became a bond, a brotherhood forged not in blood but in understanding. The people of Uruk watched in awe. Their king, once distant and cruel, began to change. With Enkidu by his side, Gilgamesh listened more, acted with restraint, and walked the streets he had once ruled from afar. The balance the gods had intended was beginning to take shape, but their friendship did not remain confined within the city walls. United, Gilgamesh and Enkidu set out on journeys that would shape the future of myth itself. Together, they sought glory and meaning, confronting monsters not just of flesh and bone, but of fear and fate. They ventured into the cedar forest to challenge the guardian Humbaba, a being so fearsome that even the gods hesitated. The battle that followed was not just a test of might, but a test of will. And they emerged victorious not because they were invincible, but because they stood together. The slaying of the bull of heaven came next, a divine punishment sent by the goddess Ishtar after Gilgamesh rejected her advances. It was a fight against divine wrath, one that pushed their bond to its limits. But once again, the two triumphed, drawing strength from their shared purpose. Yet, as all great stories remind us, even the strongest bonds cannot escape the reach of fate. The gods, angered by the defiance of mortals, decreed that one must die. And so Enkidu, once wild, then wise, was taken. His death broke Gilgamesh in a way no battle ever could. The king, who had once feared nothing, now trembled before the specter of mortality. In losing Enkidu, Gilgamesh lost more than a friend. He lost the part of himself that had been reborn through their bond. The grief that followed was not just sorrow. It was a catalyst. No longer the cruel tyrant, Gilgamesh became a seeker. He set out across the world, driven by the hope that somewhere, somehow, there was an escape from death. But what he ultimately found was not a secret to eternal life, but a deeper understanding of what it meant to live. He learned that immortality does not lie in never dying, but in being remembered, in building, in loving, in telling stories that endure beyond one's final breath. And so, the cruel king became the wise one. His transformation, sparked by the creation of Enkidu, echoes across time. The gods answered the cries of the people, not with thunder or destruction, but with a mirror showing Gilgamesh what he had become. and who he could still be. His story, preserved on clay tablets buried for millennia beneath the sands of Nineveh, continues to speak to us even now. Because in Gilgamesh we see ourselves, flawed, searching, capable of great darkness, but also of change, redemption, and the profound beauty of friendship. In the wilderness, untouched by the hand of civilization, a man roamed with the beasts, his hair long and tangled like the grasses of the steppe, his limbs strong as the boughs of the tamarisk tree. His name was Enkidu, and though shaped in the image of man, he lived as one with nature, far from the walls and order of cities. He drank from the rivers beside antelope and deer, ran with the herds, and feared neither predator nor storm. He was born not from woman, but from the will of the gods themselves, sent as an answer, a reckoning, a mirror, to reflect the unchecked force that was Gilgamesh. For in the shining city of Uruk, where walls of baked bricks stretched toward the heavens and ziggurats cast long shadows over bustling markets, a king had grown too proud. Gilgamesh, part divine, part mortal, ruled with unmatched might, but his heart had grown distant from his people. He claimed sons for battle, daughters for his own desires, and no one dared speak against him. The cries of the people rose to the heavens, and the gods, moved by their suffering, shaped Enkidu from the sacred clay of the steppe. But raw power, no matter how noble in origin, needed direction. Enkidu knew nothing of language, ritual, or reason. He could fell trees with his bare hands, outrun horses, and face lions without flinching. But he knew not his purpose, nor the destiny inscribed upon his spirit. That would change with the coming of a hunter, a man who saw the wild figure disrupting his traps, scattering the herds, a creature so unlike any other. The hunter, frightened yet intrigued, journeyed back to Uruk and sought counsel from the temple. There, it was said, lived Shamhat, a sacred woman of wisdom and allure, who could draw the wild into the world of men. So Shamhat was sent, and for 6 days and 7 nights she stayed with Enkidu in the open plain, not just in passion, but in presence. She taught him of humanity, the language of touch, of voice, of tenderness. She offered him bread and wine, and with each bite, each sip, he shed his feral shell. The animals, once his kin, fled from him now, no longer recognizing the man he had become. And though he mourned that loss, something else stirred within him, an awareness, a calling, a longing to understand his place in the world beyond the trees. Together they journeyed to Uruk. Enkidu stood before the gates, awed by their scale, their artistry, their very defiance of nature's decay. He entered the city not as a beast, but as a man transformed. But news of his arrival reached the ears of Gilgamesh, who saw in this stranger a challenge, a force that might match his own. And so, without words of welcome or diplomacy, the two met in the streets, and the earth trembled beneath their clash. It was a battle worthy of song. Stone cracked beneath their feet, dust clouded the midday sun, and the people watched, breathless, as king and wild man tested one another's strength. But as the struggle wore on, something unexpected happened. Rage gave way to respect. Blows turned into embraces. Their fury cooled, not into defeat, but into recognition each had found in the other the part of himself he had never known was missing. From that day forward, Gilgamesh and Enkidu were bound by a friendship so deep it altered the very course of the epic. Gilgamesh, once aloof and unchallenged, found in Enkidu a brother, a conscience, a companion who dared to question him not out of rebellion, but out of care. And Enkidu, once of the wild, now walked beside the king, his heart no longer divided between forest and stone. Together, they would seek glory. Together, they would defy gods and monsters. And together, they would learn that even the greatest strength cannot shield the soul from grief, nor ambition from consequence. But for now, in the golden light of Uruk's evening sun, their friendship stood as the most powerful force in the world. A union forged not by blood, but by fate. And the journey ahead, filled with wonder and sorrow alike, was only just beginning. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu had become legendary within the walls of Uruk, where once the king had ruled with unchecked pride. Now he walked beside a companion who tempered his fire with wisdom, who met his ambition with honesty. Together, they were no longer just powerful men. They were a force of destiny. And yet, in Gilgamesh's heart, a hunger still burned. It was not the hunger for conquest or domination, but for meaning beyond mortality. The kings of old were remembered not because they lived long, but because they dared to do what others could not. And so, one day, standing upon the terrace of his palace and looking beyond the city walls, Gilgamesh turned to Enkidu with a glint of daring in his eyes. "There lies a forest," he said, "untouched by man, sacred to the gods, guarded by a being of immense power. If we are to leave our names etched into stone, let it be through a deed that will echo through the ages. Let us go to the cedar forest and slay Humbaba." The name alone stirred fear in those who heard it. Humbaba, the ancient guardian, set there by the god Enlil to protect the forest from mortal hands. His face was said to twist like a storm, his voice like thunder rolling across the mountains. Many had dreamed of glory in that forest. None had returned. Enkidu, once a creature of the wild, knew of this guardian. He had heard whispers carried on the wind, the rustle of trees that spoke of a power older than any kingdom. At first, Enkidu hesitated. The cedar forest is not a place for mortals. Humbaba is no mere beast. He was shaped by the gods, given strength beyond comprehension. To step into his domain is to defy the divine. But Gilgamesh was not swayed. Are we to live as shadows, content with comfort and caution? I would rather fall in pursuit of greatness than fade into the dust of forgotten kings. Enkidu saw the fire in his friend's eyes, the same fire that had once made him reckless, now tempered by purpose. And so, with a heavy heart and a warrior's resolve, he agreed. Preparations were made. Sacred weapons were forged, prayers offered, and dreams consulted. The elders of Uruk begged them not to go, but Gilgamesh stood firm. The path of heroes was never walked in safety. The journey to the cedar forest was long and perilous. Through scorching plains, over rugged mountains, and across shadowed valleys they traveled. As they walked, Gilgamesh was plagued by strange dreams, visions of falling stars, of towering mountains collapsing into ash, of wild bulls trampling the earth. Each morning he recounted them. And Enkidu, drawing on his bond with the natural world, interpreted their meaning. "These are omens," he said. "They warn us of danger, yes, but they also mark you as chosen, one whom the heavens watch." When at last they reached the edge of the cedar forest, a hush fell over the land. The trees towered above like giants turned to wood, their fragrance thick in the air, sacred and intoxicating. No birds sang there, no breeze stirred. It was as if the very forest held its breath. They stepped within, hearts pounding. Deeper and deeper they went, until the silence broke not with birdsong, but with a low, grinding sound like boulders shifting beneath the earth. And then he appeared. Humbaba. His eyes burned like coals beneath a brow of twisted bark. His breath came in gusts that bent the cedar branches. His voice rumbled across the ground, shaking leaves from trees. Who dares disturb the forest of the gods? Gilgamesh raised his weapon. Enkidu stood at his side, spear in hand. Together they faced a force older than empires, a guardian who had stood watch since time began. The battle that followed was like none other. The forest groaned under the clash of divine strength and mortal will. Gilgamesh struck with fury, Enkidu with precision. Humbaba fought with the wrath of storms. But fate had already chosen its course. With a final cry that echoed through the valleys, Humbaba fell. The forest wept as he did, and even the sky seemed to dim. As the dust settled, Gilgamesh stood over the fallen guardian, not with triumph, but with awe. "We have done what no man dared," he whispered. "But at what cost?" Enkidu looked to the sky. "The gods will see this, and they will not forget." And so the two heroes carved a cedar tree, shaping it into a great gate for the temple of Uruk, a symbol of their deed. They had won fame, but they had also crossed a line, defying the divine, disturbing the balance. The journey home was quiet. Though victorious, both men felt a weight pressing upon them, as if their steps stirred echoes not yet understood. The tale of Humbaba's fall would be told for generations. But in the eyes of the gods, the story was only beginning. The triumph over Humbaba brought glory to Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but also something more elusive, an awareness of the boundaries they had crossed. The cedar forest, once untouched, now echoed with the memory of their defiance. And though the people of Uruk hailed their return with celebration, the gods watched from afar, displeased by the boldness of mortals, who dared challenge their will. Not long after their return, word spread of their heroic feat across the heavens. The sacred trees had been cut, the divine guardians slain, and the balance carefully maintained by the gods had been disturbed. Yet the final blow to celestial pride would not come from battle, it would come from rejection. Ishtar, goddess of love and war, descended from her heavenly throne in radiant splendor. She had seen Gilgamesh, his strength unmatched, his fame spreading across kingdoms like wildfire. Enticed by his beauty and power, she approached him, not as a deity seeking worship, but as a woman seeking a king. With honeyed words, she offered him everything: kingship beyond Uruk, chariots made of lapis lazuli, power over all lands, even divine favor to protect him from death itself. But Gilgamesh, though flattered, did not forget the stories. Ishtar's lovers were said to suffer ruin. Tammuz, the shepherd god, whom she sent to the underworld, the lion whose back she once caressed only to blind and destroy, the stallion she tamed, then cursed. He looked into her eyes, unflinching, and said, "Why would I become another name in your list of discarded lovers? Your love is fleeting, your wrath eternal." Humiliated before the court of Uruk, Ishtar ascended in fury to the heavens. At her father's feet, she wept not in sorrow but in rage. "Father Anu," she pleaded, "grant me the bull of heaven, that I may punish Gilgamesh for his insolence. Let him see that no mortal, no matter how strong, can mock the gods without consequence." Anu, hesitant, warned her of the consequences. The bull was a force of destruction, one that could drain the rivers, wither the earth, and bring famine to cities. But Ishtar would not be denied. At last her father relented. The bull of heaven was unleashed. Across the plains of Uruk it thundered, each step tearing the earth, its breath scorching the fields. Panic swept through the people as houses collapsed and livestock perished. The bull was a fury incarnate, sent to crush pride beneath its hooves. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood undaunted. Together they faced the divine beast, just as they had faced Humbaba. Enkidu, nimble and fierce, dodged its deadly horns, while Gilgamesh struck with calculated might. The battle shook the ground, but the bond between the two men held fast. In time they drove their weapons deep into the beast's side, bringing it down with a final, thunderous roar. The earth fell silent. Enkidu, filled with wild joy and defiance, tore the bull's thigh from its carcass and hurled it toward the heavens, toward Ishtar herself, mocking her power. The goddess, wounded in pride more than in flesh, vanished in a storm of fury. But the gods had seen enough. In the great halls above, the council of deities gathered. They had watched these two men slay a divine guardian, insult a goddess, and now kill a creature of heaven itself. Their deeds, while brave, had tipped the scales too far. Immortality was not the domain of mortals. To let them continue would be to invite chaos into a world already fragile. Anu spoke. "One must pay the price. Let Enkidu, the wild man tamed, bearer of divine knowledge, be taken. Let his death serve as a warning that even the boldest must answer to fate." That night, Enkidu dreamt of the underworld. He saw himself standing before a great gate, beyond which lay darkness thick and endless. He saw kings in rags, warriors without swords, priests forgotten by their gods. He woke in a cold sweat, clutching his chest, and then, slowly, his strength began to fade. A mysterious illness took hold of him, not one of flesh, but of spirit. Gilgamesh watched helplessly as his friend withered before his eyes. Day after day, Enkidu's voice grew weaker, his gaze more distant. The once fierce warrior who had run with gazelles, fought gods, and stood fearless before death, now lay confined to a bed, railing against the injustice of it all. "Why must I die?" he cried. Why must the gods punish me for loyalty and courage? I stood by my friend. I faced death again and again, and this is my reward." Gilgamesh wept beside him, unable to answer. He held Enkidu's hand, remembering their battles, their laughter, their dreams of glory. He whispered stories of the past, hoping his voice could anchor Enkidu to the world a little longer. But death, once sent, does not turn back. When Enkidu finally passed, a stillness settled over Uruk. The king, once feared and adored, now walked the palace halls like a man lost in his own kingdom. He had faced monsters, defied gods, and emerged victorious. But against death he was powerless. The loss shattered Gilgamesh. He had always known he was part mortal, but Enkidu's death made that truth unbearable. What glory could erase the silence that followed death? What monument could fill the void left by a friend? Thus began the next chapter, not of conquest, but of desperate searching. For Gilgamesh, once the hunter of fame, would now become the seeker of eternity. The death of Enkidu shattered Gilgamesh in ways he never imagined possible. For the first time in his life, the great king of Uruk, once proud, unstoppable, and seemingly invincible, found himself powerless. He had faced monsters, gods, and the forces of nature itself, but none of those trials had prepared him for the raw finality of death. His closest companion, the one man who had truly understood him, now lay lifeless before him. Enkidu had been more than a friend. He was a mirror, a brother, a piece of Gilgamesh's very soul, and now that piece was gone. As he sat beside Enkidu's lifeless form, days and nights passed in a blur. He refused to leave him. Flies gathered. The priests whispered. His advisors begged him to accept the inevitable. But how could he? How could someone so full of laughter and strength, who once ran wild with beasts and faced the gods without fear, now be reduced to silence and stillness? Gilgamesh, the mighty king, began to weep like a child. This grief marked the beginning of a new journey, one far more treacherous than any battle. It was not against monsters or kings, but against time itself. Gilgamesh became obsessed with a single question: must he too die one day? And if death could claim even Enkidu, what hope did any human have? Terrified by the thought of his own mortality, Gilgamesh left Uruk behind. He abandoned his royal robes and adorned himself in animal skins, wandering through wilderness and desolate lands. No longer a king, he was now a seeker, a desperate soul, chasing whispers of an ancient truth. He had heard tales of a man named Utnapishtim, a survivor of the great flood, granted eternal life by the gods. If anyone knew the secret to escaping death, it was him. The road to Utnapishtim was long and perilous. Gilgamesh crossed mountains veiled in eternal darkness, where the sun never touched the path. He wandered through forests and deserts, speaking with creatures and spirits, each offering riddles but no comfort. In one forgotten land he met Siduri, a mysterious tavern keeper by the sea. She offered him wisdom instead of magic, telling him that humans were meant to live, love, and enjoy the world, not chase immortality. But Gilgamesh refused to be swayed. To him, life without answers was no life at all. Eventually, he found Urshanabi, a boatman, who agreed to ferry him across the deadly waters that led to Utnapishtim's realm. With smashed stones and burned hands, Gilgamesh built what was needed to complete the voyage. He was no longer the man who once ruled from golden palaces. He was a man broken and rebuilt by grief. When Gilgamesh finally stood before Utnapishtim, he looked nothing like a king. His eyes were hollow, his body gaunt, and his voice cracked with exhaustion. Yet his question was clear. How can a man escape death? Utnapishtim, with the wisdom of ages, did not offer him a spell or a secret elixir. Instead, he told Gilgamesh the story of the Great Flood, the tale of how the gods once decided to wipe out humanity but spared him and his wife. For his survival, he had been gifted eternal life. But that was a decision of the gods, not something earned or stolen. Still, Gilgamesh persisted. Seeing his desperation, Utnapishtim offered him a challenge: stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. If he could conquer sleep, the little death, then perhaps he could overcome the Great One. But no sooner had the challenge begun than Gilgamesh succumbed to exhaustion. Sleep claimed him, gentle but undeniable. When he awoke, confused and ashamed, Utnapishtim revealed the passage of time by pointing to the loaves of bread baked each day of his slumber. Gilgamesh had failed, but the story did not end there. Utnapishtim, moved by his persistence, told him of a hidden plant that could restore youth. Gilgamesh found it, rejoiced, and planned to share it with the elders of Uruk. But on the journey back, while bathing in a pool, a serpent stole the plant away its scent, attracting the creature from the depths. The irony stung deeper than any sword. Gilgamesh had endured so much, only to lose the answer in a moment of carelessness, yet something had changed. He no longer raged against the gods or his fate. As he returned to Uruk, the city he once ruled with arrogance, he saw it with new eyes. Its walls, its people, its achievements, these were lasting legacies. Maybe not eternal life, but a kind of immortality all the same. In the end, Gilgamesh's journey was not about defeating death. It was about understanding life, its fragility, its beauty, and the importance of what we leave behind. Through loss and longing, he had become something far greater than a hero. He had become human. Through parched lands and shadowed valleys, Gilgamesh wandered no longer the proud king of Uruk, but a man haunted by loss, driven by questions no mortal should ask. The death of Enkidu had shattered his once unbreakable confidence, and now he roamed the edges of the world, chasing whispers of eternal life. His journey led him to the ends of the earth, to a place where the sun rested after its long course beyond mountains. No man dared to cross, past scorpion guardians who stood watch over the tunnel of darkness that led to enlightenment or madness. It was in this desolate and unreachable place that Gilgamesh sought out Utnapishtim, the man said to have lived through the great flood, a man gifted immortality by the gods themselves. Legend spoke of Utnapishtim as more than a man, but not quite a god, living far across the seas in a realm no ordinary mortal could find. Yet Gilgamesh pressed on, driven by a singular desperation. If death could take Enkidu, it could take him, and this was something the once invincible king could not bear. When at last he reached Utnapishtim's dwelling, the figure he found before him was unassuming. No divine glow surrounded him, no crown marked his brow. He was an old man, weathered by centuries, his eyes holding the weight of a world lost beneath waves. Gilgamesh, unkempt and exhausted, fell to his knees and poured out his sorrow of Enkidu's death, of the unbearable fear of oblivion, of his long and tortured journey. He begged for the secret that would free him from the fate shared by all mankind. Utnapishtim listened in silence. When Gilgamesh finished, the old man did not respond with divine wisdom or promises of eternal life. Instead, he told a story. Long ago, Utnapishtim said, the gods once walked among mortals. But humanity, noisy and unruly, tested their patience. So the gods convened and resolved to destroy all life with a great flood. But Ea, the god of wisdom and deep waters, whispered to Utnapishtim in a dream and warned him to build a vessel, massive and sealed tight, capable of preserving life through the deluge to come. Utnapishtim obeyed. He built an ark and filled it with his family, craftsmen, animals of every kind, and seeds for the future. For 7 days and nights the heavens wept, and the earth trembled. The world drowned beneath waters so deep the highest mountains disappeared. When the rain stopped and the waters receded, the ark came to rest atop a mountain. Life began again, seeded from the few who had survived. In recognition of his obedience and reverence, the gods rewarded Utnapishtim and his wife with immortality, but only as a singular act never to be repeated. Utnapishtim's gaze fixed on Gilgamesh as he finished the tale. Immortality, he said gently, is not a gift meant for men. It is a burden and a separation from all things loved and known. To live forever is to watch the world decay and be reborn endlessly, never again truly belonging to it. Still, Gilgamesh was not ready to accept the finality of his mortal fate. He pleaded once more. Moved by the king's perseverance, Utnapishtim offered a test. If Gilgamesh could remain awake for 6 days and 7 nights, he might prove his worthiness. But before Utnapishtim had even finished his words, sleep crept in and conquered Gilgamesh, proof enough that even the mightiest man was still bound by the same limits as all others. When Gilgamesh awoke, ashamed, Utnapishtim's wife took pity and persuaded her husband to at least offer the weary king a parting gift. Utnapishtim revealed the existence of a plant that grew deep beneath the waters, known as the old men are young again. If Gilgamesh could retrieve it, he might not gain eternal life, but he could restore youth to himself and his people. Hope rekindled, Gilgamesh dove into the depths and retrieved the plant. As he journeyed home, heart lightened, he bathed in a spring to refresh himself. But while he did, a serpent slithered in, drawn by the plant's divine scent. It devoured the precious gift and vanished, shedding its skin as it fled, mocking the very rebirth Gilgamesh had sought. Empty-handed and heavy-hearted, Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, not as a failure, but as a man transformed. He stood atop the city walls he had once boasted of, no longer to marvel at his own strength, but to reflect on the lives protected within. The lesson had been brutal, but it was clear immortality is not achieved through defiance of death, but through the legacy one leaves behind. Gilgamesh had searched the world for a way to live forever, only to discover that his name, his city, and his deeds were already eternal in their own right. The king who began his story seeking to conquer gods ended it by becoming something far more human, and in that, something truly timeless. Though Gilgamesh had come so far, crossing lands no mortal had dared traverse, speaking with beings of myth and legend, he ultimately faltered when it mattered most. Utnapishtim, the flood survivor blessed with immortality, offered the king one final chance, an opportunity to prove his worth. If Gilgamesh could stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, he might earn what no other man could, eternal life. But wearied by his endless journey and burdened by grief, Gilgamesh succumbed to sleep almost immediately. It was not divine punishment that denied him. It was the limits of human nature itself. When he awoke, confused and ashamed, Utnapishtim gently reminded him that the very fact of his failure was proof that immortality was not meant for mortals. Yet, in a moment of compassion, Utnapishtim revealed a hidden secret. Deep beneath the waters lay a plant that could restore youth. Not quite eternal life, but a chance to reclaim vitality, perhaps even begin anew. Driven by desperation, Gilgamesh dove into the depths and retrieved the miraculous plant. For the first time in his journey, hope stirred in his chest. He imagined returning to Uruk with a gift that would defy time itself. Perhaps he would not live forever, but he could offer something eternal to his people. But as he rested beside a quiet pool on his way home, a serpent emerged, drawn by the scent of the plant. Silent and swift, it devoured the prize and slithered away, shedding its skin as if mocking the transformation that now belonged to it alone. The loss was crushing, but this time Gilgamesh did not rage against the gods or weep for what had been taken. Something had changed. The great king had learned that the quest for immortality is not one of body, but of legacy. When he returned to Uruk, he did not speak of magic plants or godlike beings. Instead, he looked out over his city, its high walls, its bustling streets, the temples that reached for the heavens, and realized that this was what would endure. In the end, it was not the strength of his arms or the depth of his grief that defined Gilgamesh. It was the story itself. His journey, full of pride, loss, friendship, and self-discovery, became the very thing that made him eternal. Carved into clay thousands of years ago, passed down by scribes and scholars, his tale lived on far beyond his reign. Gilgamesh did not defeat death, but he became immortal in another way, through story. And that is the paradox at the heart of humanity. We may be destined to fade, to return to dust, but in the tales we leave behind, in the cities we build, the friendships we forge, and the questions we ask, we defy time. Gilgamesh searched for something no man could hold, but in doing so, he helped us all understand what truly lasts. So as you sit with his story now, across the ages and continents, you are part of that legacy. His footsteps echo in yours, and the same questions that haunted him still whisper in the silence of our nights. What does it mean to live, to die? And, perhaps most importantly, what will we leave behind? Certainly. Here's the 900-word narrative continuation, seamlessly connected with the previous sections, written in a storytelling style as requested. When Gilgamesh finally stepped through the gates of Uruk, the city seemed both unchanged and entirely different. The sun still cast golden light over its towering walls. and the Euphrates still whispered past its borders. Yet the man who once ruled here with unmatched pride was no longer the same. His armor bore the wear of distant travels, his eyes held the weight of lost friendship, and his soul had been scorched by questions no crown could silence. He had set out to conquer death, but what he found instead was a deeper understanding of life. No one in Uruk knew of the scorpion guardians he had faced at the edge of the world, nor of the ferrymen who had taken him across the waters of death. They had not seen him cry beneath the stars or scream into the wind, clutching a body that once laughed beside him. They knew nothing of Utnapishtim, or of the ancient flood that washed the world clean, or of the serpent that had stolen the one thing he believed could rewrite fate. But they could sense it in him. Something had shifted. The king who returned was not the one who had left. As he walked through the streets, he no longer saw them with the eyes of a ruler. He saw the stonemasons chiseling the city's walls, the mothers carrying water, the children chasing each other through narrow alleys. He saw the pulse of something fragile and beautiful, life as it was, not life as he had tried to force it to be. He climbed to the top of Uruk's outer wall, the same structure he once boasted about in songs of conquest. But this time he looked not to admire his own achievement, but to understand its meaning. These walls would outlast him. They would shield generations he would never meet. They would stand as silent witnesses to joy, sorrow, birth, and death long after his name faded from memory. Unless, of course, that name was carried not by power, but by purpose. And so Gilgamesh began to inscribe his story, not as a tale of victory over death, but as a journey toward wisdom. He wrote of Enkidu, the wild man who became his brother, whose death broke open the fortress of his heart. He wrote of the gods, of his defiance and their justice, of the trials that humbled him. He told of the flood and the ancient truths hidden in its wake, of the dream of immortality and the quiet resignation when it slipped from his grasp. But most importantly, he wrote of what he saw now with clearer eyes, that the value of a life is not measured in how long it lasts, but in how deeply it touches others. That the walls of Uruk, the laughter of a friend, the hands that build, create, and nurture these, are what give life meaning. Mortality, once his greatest fear, had become the very thing that gave urgency to love, to beauty, to memory. His people saw the change. He was still their king, but no longer a man obsessed with power or haunted by loss. He led not with commands, but with compassion. He honored the gods without seeking their gifts. He walked among his people as one of them, not above them. And when he spoke of the days to come, he spoke not of eternal youth or divine secrets, but of gardens to plant, homes to build, and stories to pass down. And those stories did not fade. Clay tablets bearing his words survived fires and floods, wars and empires. His name traveled far beyond the banks of the Euphrates, crossing deserts and oceans, carried by scholars, poets, and dreamers. Not because he became a god, but because he became fully human. In the end, Gilgamesh discovered a truth that even the gods could not bestow, that legacy is not carved into stone or sealed by immortal blood. It is breathed into every act of kindness, every lesson passed from parent to child, every tale told beneath the stars. It is not about defying death, but about honoring life. So when you read his story today, know that you are part of the reason he lives on, that the questions he asked about loss, about fear, about what it means to matter, are the same ones we still ask, and that perhaps, like him, the answers we seek are not at the end of the world, but waiting quietly in the lives we touch and the stories we leave behind. As the tale of Gilgamesh draws to a close, we are left not with the triumph of a hero who cheated death, but with the quiet, enduring resonance of a man who learned what it meant to live. His story does not end in the eternal gardens of the gods or in the glow of immortality, but within the very walls of his city Uruk, where life unfolds with all its beauty, heartbreak, and impermanence. What began as a tale of conquest transforms into something far more powerful, a meditation on the essence of being human. Gilgamesh, once a king driven by pride and haunted by the fear of death, returned to his people not as a man who had found all the answers, but as one who had faced the hardest questions. He experienced profound friendship, devastating loss, and the humbling realization that no one, not even a king, 2/3 divine, can outrun the limits of time. Through the death of Enkidu, We saw grief not as weakness, but as a mirror of love. Their bond became the emotional heart of the epic, not the monsters slain, nor the gates broken down. That friendship taught Gilgamesh that connection, not conquest, is what anchors our lives. In the silence that followed Enkidu's final breath, Gilgamesh heard the deepest truth, that love leaves an echo which no shadow can erase. His journey across the edge of the world through darkness, past immortal guardians, into the presence of the man who survived the flood, was not simply a quest for eternal life. It was a pilgrimage toward understanding. He faced gods and legends, storms and silence, only to return with a gift greater than immortality, perspective. Civilization itself becomes a character in the epic. Uruk, with its towering walls and intricate temples, is more than a backdrop. It represents what humans can build together when they stop fighting against time and instead work within its bounds. Gilgamesh came to understand that his greatest creation was not his strength or bravery, but the city he protected, the people he led, and the stories he helped shape. In many ways, his story is our story. We may not battle lions with bare hands or speak with ancient gods, but we know what it feels like to grieve someone we love. We know the ache of asking, what comes next? We have stood in the shadow of loss, searched for meaning in chaos, and wondered if what we do will be remembered. And just like Gilgamesh, we find that the answer is rarely in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments, the shared smile, the helping hand, the words passed from one heart to another. The Epic of Gilgamesh may be thousands of years old, yet its voice still reaches across time. It speaks to the human condition in ways that are startlingly relevant today. In a world obsessed with speed, permanence, and perfection, Gilgamesh reminds us that there is power in slowing down, in accepting our limits, and in finding grace within them. His legacy teaches that strength lies not in avoiding mortality, but in living so fully, so meaningfully, that death does not get the final word. And so, as we close this ancient chapter, we do not say goodbye to a myth. We carry it with us. Every time we honor a friend, every time we choose compassion over cruelty, every time we create something that will outlast us, we walk a little in Gilgamesh's footsteps. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of the world's oldest and most profound stories. If this tale moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect even just a little, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next deep dive into the forgotten corners of history and human spirit. Your support helps keep these stories alive, passed from one generation to the next, just as they were meant to be. And now, wherever you are, whether under starlit skies or resting in the warmth of your own home, I wish you peace, reflection, and rest. Let the story of Gilgamesh settle into your dreams tonight, reminding you that while we may not live forever, we can still live fully, love deeply, and leave behind something that truly matters. Good night.